"Stay inside me fully," the giant mail-order bride whispered. "Only you," the lonely rancher growled, pressing deeper into her warmth. "Stay inside me fully," the giant mail-order bride whispered against the lonely rancher's throat, her massive frame trembling beneath him in the lamplight. But the words weren't about bodies joining in their marriage bed. Magnolia Thornfield stood 6'4" in her bare feet, a woman built like a blacksmith's anvil in a world that worshipped delicate china dolls. At 28, she'd crossed half a continent to marry a stranger, to become a mail-order bride for a Montana rancher who needed strong hands more than a soft heart. She'd prepared herself for duty, for labor, for a man who'd use her strength by day and her body by night while keeping his soul locked away. What she hadn't prepared for was Josiah McAllister, the lonely rancher with grief carved into every line of his weathered face. A man still whispering to his dead wife's ghost 3 years after burying her. "Only you." Josiah growled against Maggie's lips, pressing deeper into her warmth after 5 months of mechanical coupling in darkness. 5 months of giving her his body while his heart remained buried on a hill overlooking Broken Creek. The giant mail-order bride had demanded more. The lonely rancher had finally broken. But 6 months earlier, their story had started very differently. October 14th, 1876. Silver Bend Station, Montana Territory. The train whistle cut through autumn air like a knife through silk, and Josiah McAllister stood on that platform with his dead wife's last letter folded against his heart. Clara had made him promise before she died, promise he wouldn't spend the rest of his life alone, talking to ghosts. He'd promised. He'd lied. And now, 3 years after burying the only woman he'd ever loved, desperation had driven him to send for a mail-order bride he didn't want. The banknote was due in 6 months. His ranch was dying. He was dying. He needed help, not love. A transaction, not a marriage. Then the passenger car door opened, and Magnolia Thornfield stepped into Montana sunlight. Josiah's first thought was honest and cruel. They'd sent him a man in a dress. His second thought, as she turned and he saw the unmistakable curve of her body, the softness in her face. Dear God, she's a woman, just more woman than any man's ever seen. She was taller than him by 4 inches, with shoulders that would shame most ranch hands and hands that could span a wagon wheel. Her homemade dress strained at every seam. She carried a battered carpetbag and held her hat against the wind. Grey eyes scanning the platform like a wolf entering a trap. Those eyes found him, stopped, waited. Josiah stepped forward, hat in hand, extending his palm. "Miss Thornfield, welcome to Montana." Her hand swallowed his, work roughened, strong, warm, and she shook once before pulling away like she'd been burned. "I apologize if I'm not what you expected, Mr. McAllister." Her voice was soft, southern honey over gravel, and every word was a test. "But I'm a hard worker. I can handle livestock, mend fences, work a forge. I don't eat much, considering my size. I can read and figure numbers. I won't be a burden." She was negotiating her own worth like livestock at auction, and something in Josiah's chest cracked open. "I'm sure you won't be, Miss Thornfield. But first you must be hungry. There's a restaurant in town." Surprise flickered across her face, disbelief. She'd expected rejection, not kindness. "I can wait, sir." "I can't." He offered his arm. "Please." She stared at his arm like it might bite her, like this was a trick she didn't understand. Then, so carefully it hurt to watch, she rested her fingertips in the crook of his elbow, feather-light, afraid. As they walked toward town, the stares started. Old Man Cooper at the feed store, lips pursing in judgment. Pearl DeVoe outside her dress shop, eyes wide with shock. 2 cowboys outside the saloon, one elbowing the other and laughing. Maggie's hand tightened on Josiah's arm. Her spine went rigid, braced for humiliation she'd lived with her entire life. "Let them look," Josiah said, surprised by the steel in his own voice. "They always do," she whispered, and in those 3 words, he heard every cruel joke, every rejection, every man who'd called her unnatural. 4 hours later, Reverend Hosea Pritchard married them in the church vestry with the sheriff and his wife as witnesses. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Josiah slid his dead wife's wedding ring onto Maggie's finger. He'd meant to buy a new one, but there hadn't been time. And now, watching that thin gold band disappear on her large finger, he felt like he was betraying both women at once. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride," Josiah leaned up because she was taller, and pressed a chaste kiss to her cheek. Her skin was warm, soft. She smelled like train smoke and lavender soap. She didn't move, didn't breathe. She stood frozen like a woman, waiting for a blow that never came. They rode back to Broken Creek in silence, 12 miles of nothing but creaking wheels and stars emerging overhead. Josiah tried 3 times to start a conversation. Failed 3 times. When the ranch finally appeared in the valley below, log cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, barn and corrals, creek cutting silver through darkening land, Maggie drew a sharp breath. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and unexpected pride flared in Josiah's chest. But the pride died the moment he led her inside. Clara was everywhere. Her curtains on the windows, her rocking chair by the fireplace, her dried wildflowers on the mantel, her dishes, her hairbrush, her nightgown folded on the bedroom chair. 3 years of dust coating a dead woman's life. Maggie saw it immediately, saw the shrine he'd built to grief, and something in her face closed off. "Your wife," she said quietly. "She passed?" 3 years ago. Pneumonia. I'm sorry, the bedroom was worse." Josiah set her carpetbag down and turned to find Maggie standing in the doorway, too tall for the frame, having to duck. "I meant what I said," she told him, armor in every syllable. "About fulfilling my duties. I understand this is a business arrangement. You needed help. I needed somewhere to go. I won't expect anything beyond that." Every word was protection against the rejection she knew was coming. "Do you want separate rooms?" Josiah heard himself ask. She blinked. "What?" "I can sleep in the barn if you'd prefer. Or the spare room downstairs." Hope and confusion warred on her face. "You don't want to—" "Not like this," he said. "Not tonight, Relief 1. Thank you." He left her there, surrounded by another woman's things, and went to sleep in the barn with his horse and his guilt. That night set the pattern for everything that followed. Days, they worked separately. Josiah on distant fences, Maggie in the house. Evenings, they ate together in silence so thick it could choke. Nights, he disappeared to the barn or the spare room, and Maggie lay alone in a dead woman's bed, wondering what she'd done wrong. By the 4th day, she couldn't stand it anymore. She found him wrestling with a fence post, shirt soaked with sweat despite October cold, and she grabbed the post with one hand and held it steady without even straining. He stared at her hand, barely flexing. "Let me help," she said. "This is heavy, not for me." They worked together for the first time, Maggie's strength making quick work of what would have taken Josiah hours alone. She drove posts he couldn't budge, lifted rails he'd need a lever for, held beams while he nailed. He didn't mock her strength, didn't flinch from it, just worked beside her like she was exactly what he needed. When they finished, he surveyed the fence with something almost like wonder. "That's good work, Maggie." Her name in his mouth felt like absolution. That night, he slept in the spare room instead of the barn. Progress, she thought. Painful, tiny progress. But 18 days later, everything changed. The screaming woke them both before dawn, on October 22nd. Maggie bolted upright in bed, heart hammering against her ribs like a prisoner against bars, and below her she heard Josiah's footsteps pounding, heard him curse, heard the rifle rack clatter. She grabbed her robe and ran downstairs. Josiah stood at the door, rifle in hand, staring toward the henhouse, where chickens were shrieking like the world was ending. "Grizzly," he said, voice flat with dread. "Stay inside." He was out the door before she could respond, running toward the henhouse in nothing but his union suit and boots. Maggie pressed her face to the window and saw it in the pre-dawn light. A massive shape tearing at the chicken wire, 7 feet tall if it was an inch, 600 pounds of muscle and teeth and rage. Josiah raised the rifle, aimed. The grizzly turned and charged. Maggie didn't think. She grabbed the axe from beside the fireplace and ran. Her long legs ate the distance faster than Josiah expected. She saw him fumbling to reload, saw the bear closing, saw the exact moment he realized he wouldn't make it in time. She put herself between them. The grizzly reared up on its hind legs, roaring, spittle flying from jaws that could crush a skull like an eggshell. It was massive. It was death on 4 legs. It was everything that had ever wanted to destroy her made flesh. Maggie swung the axe with every ounce of strength God had cursed her with. The blade bit deep into the bear's shoulder. It screamed, a sound that would haunt her nightmares for years, and swiped at her with claws like curved knives. Pain exploded across her forearm as those claws opened her skin to the bone, but she held onto the axe and swung again. This time she caught it in the neck. The grizzly went down thrashing, and she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Swung again and again until her arms screamed, and the world was red, and the bear stopped moving, and she was covered in blood that wasn't all the animal's. Maggie. Maggie. Hands on her shoulders, strong and shaking. Josiah pulling her back, taking the axe from her trembling grip. It's dead. You killed it. It's over. She looked down at the bear, at her blood-soaked robe, at her hands shaking so hard she couldn't make them stop. I'm sorry, she whispered, and the words tumbled out in a rush she couldn't control. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I know I shouldn't have. I'm too violent, too much. I'm not what a wife should be. You saved my life. She looked up at him. His face was white as January snow, eyes wide with shock, and something else, something she couldn't name. That bear would have killed me, he said slowly, like the truth was just now hitting him between the eyes. I would be dead right now. You just killed a grizzly bear with an axe. I'm sorry, she said again, starting to cry because she'd shown him exactly what she was, a freak, a monster, too strong, too much, everything men ran from. I didn't want you to see me like this. Like some kind of... Josiah dropped the axe and pulled her against him. The embrace shocked them both. She was taller, broader, covered in blood and gore, and he held her like she was made of spun glass, like she was precious, like she was breakable. You're the bravest person I've ever met, he said into her hair, his voice rough with emotion he'd locked away for 3 years. The strongest. The most. Jesus, Maggie, you're incredible. She stood frozen in his arms, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid this moment would shatter like every good thing in her life had shattered. Let's get you inside, he said finally, and his arms stayed around her waist as he led her back to the house. He sat her at the kitchen table like she was the one who needed protecting. Brought water, clean cloths, whiskey from the cupboard where he kept it for medicinal purposes, and midnight grief. This'll sting, he warned, and poured whiskey over the claw marks striping her forearm. She didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. She'd learned long ago that showing pain only made things worse. He bandaged her carefully, his hands gentle, his touch lingering on her skin in ways that made her breath catch. I should clean up, she said, because she was filthy, and the silence between them felt too heavy, too full of things neither knew how to say. I'm a mess. You're alive, Josiah said. That's what matters. Their eyes met, held. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with the space closing between who they'd been and who they might become. Why did you do that? He asked quietly. Run toward a grizzly bear that could have torn you apart. Because you would have died. You barely know me. You're my husband, she said simply, like it explained everything. That's enough. Something cracked in his expression. He stood abruptly, turned away, ran a hand through his hair like he was fighting a war inside his own head. I'll deal with the carcass, he said, voice rough as sandpaper. You should rest. But that night, when the sun finally set and exhaustion pulled them both towards sleep, Josiah brought his things upstairs. Not to the spare room, not to the barn. Upstairs, to the bedroom they'd been pretending to share. He still didn't touch her. But he slept in the same bed on the opposite side of the mattress. 6 inches of space between them that felt like miles and felt like progress all at once. In the darkness, Maggie lay perfectly still, listening to him breathe, feeling the warmth of another human being beside her for the first time in her entire adult life. She'd never shared a bed with anyone. Never been held through the night. Never known what it felt like to not be alone. And even though Josiah wasn't touching her, even though those 6 inches might as well have been the Montana wilderness, something in her chest loosened. Just a little, just enough to let hope in. The days after the grizzly changed everything and nothing. Josiah started coming to bed earlier, started talking during meals, small things at first, safe things about weather and cattle and fence repairs, then slowly, carefully more. Clara loved autumn, he said one evening, staring into his coffee like it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. She'd make me take her on rides just to see the aspens turning gold. Maggie didn't know what to say. She sounds wonderful. She was. He looked up and his eyes were full of guilt and grief and something raw. I'm sorry. I shouldn't talk about her. It's not fair to you. Why not? Maggie folded her hands on the table, those 2 big hands she'd spent her life apologizing for. She was your wife. You loved her. That doesn't just disappear. It's not fair to you, he repeated. What's not fair is pretending she didn't exist, Maggie said quietly. I can't compete with a ghost, Si. I'm not even sure I want to try. His face twisted. I'm not asking you to, aren't you? The truth sat between them like a third person at the table. Josiah was quiet for a long moment, then he said, I suppose I am. And that's not right. That's not... He trailed off, shook his head. Tell me about Georgia, about your life before you came here. So she did. About her father who'd raised her like a son after her mother died in childbirth. About working the forge and the fields and growing taller and stronger than any girl had a right to be. About the Confederate officer who'd promised to marry her after she nursed him back to health, only to humiliate her at a church social, calling her a draft horse, pretending to be a filly while everyone laughed. About leaving in the middle of the night with nothing but a carpet bag and a newspaper advertisement for mail-order brides heading west. I thought if I could just get far enough away, she said, maybe I could find somewhere I fit. Someone who needed what I am, instead of wishing I was something different. You fit here, Josiah said, and the words came out fierce, almost angry. You fit here just fine, Maggie. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. That night, when they lay in the darkness on opposite sides of the bed, Josiah reached across the mattress and took her hand. She started to pull away. Her hand was too big, too rough, too much, but he held on. Don't, he whispered. Please. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm trying, he said to the darkness, to be here with you. It's just hard. I know, she whispered back. Clara would be furious with me, he continued, for how I've treated you, for bringing you all the way out here and then keeping you at arm's length, like you're some kind of hired hand, instead of my wife. You're grieving. I'm hiding, he corrected. And you deserve better than a man who's half ghost himself. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, a bridge across the distance that was slowly, painfully closing. Over the next 2 weeks, the touches multiplied. His hand on her back as he passed her in the kitchen, her shoulder brushing his as they worked side by side. Small intimacies that felt enormous, like learning a new language 1 word at a time. Josiah stopped sleeping in his work clothes. Started washing up before bed, shaving more often, noticing things, the way Maggie braided her hair, the songs she hummed while cooking, the gentleness in her massive hands when she tended the horses. One morning in early November, he found her in the barn standing in an empty stall, singing something low and melodic in a language he didn't recognize. His most difficult horse, Rebel, a black stallion who'd nearly killed the last man who tried to break him, stood with his head lowered, pressing his forehead against Maggie's chest while she stroked his neck and sang. The horse was calm, peaceful, completely under her spell. Josiah watched from the doorway, something tightening in his chest that felt dangerously close to wonder. When she finally noticed him, she stopped singing abruptly, stepping back from Rebel like she'd been caught doing something wrong. I'm sorry, she said automatically. I know he's supposed to be dangerous, but he was agitated and I just thought, what were you singing? Oh, color rose in her cheeks. Just an old song my mother used to sing before she died. I don't even know what the words mean, but horses seem to like it. Sing it again, Josiah said. What? Please, I want to hear it. So she did, her voice soft and uncertain at first, then growing stronger. It was beautiful. She was beautiful, standing there in the morning light streaming through the barn slats, this giant woman with a voice like honey and hands that could kill bears and calm wild horses with equal ease. When she finished, Josiah realized he'd crossed the barn without meaning to, was standing close enough to touch her. That was beautiful, he said. It's nothing special. Yes, it is. You are. She looked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Like the concept of being special was so foreign, she couldn't even process it. So he kissed her, not on the cheek this time. On the mouth, soft and brief and completely unexpected. When he pulled back, her eyes were wide, lips parted in shock. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I shouldn't have. She grabbed his shirt and pulled him back, kissing him properly this time, and it was clumsy and desperate and nothing like the careful distance they'd been maintaining. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Josiah rested his forehead against hers. I'm scared, he admitted, of this, of wanting someone again. Me too, she whispered. But I do. Want you, want this, want to try. That night, they made love for the first time, really made love, not the mechanical coupling they'd managed twice before in complete darkness, out of pure obligation. Josiah lit the lamp, looked at her, touched her face, her shoulders, her arms, like he was memorizing her. You're beautiful, he said, and she started to shake her head in denial because she'd never been beautiful a day in her life. You are, he insisted. To me, you are. She cried when he entered her, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being wanted. And he kissed away her tears and moved slow and gentle until she stopped crying and started making sounds she'd never made before. Afterward, they lay tangled together, his head on her shoulder, her arms around him, and for the first time in 3 years, Josiah didn't dream about Clara's funeral. But their peace didn't last long. 3 days later, Edmund Vast rode up to Broken Creek with 2 of his men, and everything got complicated. Edmund Vast sat on his horse like a king surveying conquered land, 50 years old and cruel with it, flanked by 2 ranch hands who looked more like hired guns than cowboys. He didn't dismount, didn't remove his hat, just stared down at Josiah and Maggie standing in their own yard like they were trespassing on his property. McAllister, he said, voice smooth as snake oil. Heard you took yourself a wife. Wanted to come pay my respects. His eyes slid to Maggie, traveling up her considerable height with undisguised disgust. Though I see the rumors weren't exaggerated. That's quite a specimen you've acquired. Josiah's hand tightened on Maggie's arm. Say what you came to say, Vast, then get off my land. Your land. Vast smiled, showing too many teeth. That's what I wanted to discuss, actually. See, I've been thinking about your situation. Banknote coming due in a few months. Ranch falling apart. You're drowning out here, McAllister, and we both know it. Clara would have wanted her family to have this place. Her brother Reed's been talking to me about buying you out. Fair price. You could start over somewhere easier. I'm not selling. You will be when the bank forecloses. Vast's smile widened. Unless you think your giant bride here can save you. Though from what I hear around town, she might not be woman enough to give you the heirs you'd need to prove this ranch has a future. Assuming she's even really a woman under all that bulk, Maggie felt the words hit like fists. Vast continued, voice dripping poison. Pearl DeVoe says she had to order men's boots for her. Doc Morrison says he's never seen a female that size outside a circus. Some folks are wondering if maybe you got confused, McAllister. If maybe you ordered a bride and got something else entirely. Get out. Josiah's voice was deadly quiet. Now, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. That thing you married isn't natural. And when spring comes and you lose this ranch, don't say I didn't offer you a way out. Vast wheeled his horse around. Oh, and McAllister. The bank's getting nervous. They're moving up your deadline. Notes due March 1st now, not April. Better start figuring out where you'll go when this all falls apart. They rode off in a cloud of dust and malice. Maggie stood frozen, every word Vast said echoing in her head. Not woman enough. Not natural. That thing you married. She'd heard versions of these words her entire life, but hearing them here, in the place she'd started to believe might be home. Cut deeper than any grisly claw. Don't listen to him, Josiah said fiercely. He's just trying to... He's right, though. Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. About what people think. About what I am. You're my wife. Am I? She looked at him. Or am I just convenient? Strong enough to help save your ranch? Unusual enough that no one else would have me? The words hung between them like a blade. Josiah's face went white. Is that what you think? That I'm using you? I don't know what to think anymore. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. That banknote, Si, 2,000 acres, and we've got 4 months to come up with $800 or we lose everything. Maybe Vast is right. Maybe you should sell. Start over somewhere that doesn't have my reputation dragging you down. I'm not selling. He grabbed her shoulders, turned her to face him. And I'm damn sure not giving up on us, because Edmund Vast is a bastard who wants my water rights. We'll figure this out. How? We can't make $800 in 4 months. Not in winter. His jaw tightened. Then we'll find another way. But I'm not losing you, Maggie. Not to Vast, not to fear. Not to anything. She wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it hurt. But that night, lying in bed after Josiah finally fell asleep, Maggie stared at the ceiling and did math in her head. $800. 4 months. Impossible odds. And underneath it all, Vast's words kept circling. That thing you married, not woman enough, not natural. What if he was right? What if she'd doomed Josiah's ranch just by being herself? Too big, too strange, too much for this town to accept. She thought about leaving, slipping away before she could drag him down further. But then Josiah's arm tightened around her waist in his sleep, pulling her closer, and she couldn't do it. Couldn't leave him, not yet. Not when staying inside him fully, heart and soul and future, felt like the only home she'd ever known. Winter hit Broken Creek like God's own fist, and with it came the breaking point neither of them saw coming. February brought temperatures so cold the creek froze solid, cattle dying in the fields, and Josiah working himself to exhaustion trying to save what he could. Maggie worked beside him every frozen day, her strength the only thing keeping half the herd alive. But the math didn't lie. They were losing. The banknote loomed like a noose, and Edmund Vast circled like a vulture waiting for the kill. Then came the night, everything shattered. Josiah had been on the North Range for 2 days straight, trying to move cattle to shelter before another storm hit. When he didn't come back by dark on the second night, Maggie knew something was wrong. She saddled Rebel and rode out into a blizzard that could kill a person in an hour, tracking Josiah by instinct and prayer. She found him 3 miles out, pinned under his horse that had fallen through ice, unconscious and blue with cold. She lifted that horse, 1,200 pounds of dead weight, off him with her bare hands, screaming with effort, then carried Josiah back to Broken Creek through whiteout conditions that would have killed anyone less strong or less desperate. She stripped his frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, held him against her body for warmth, while he shivered so hard she thought his bones would break. And she whispered into his hair, "Don't you dare die on me, Josiah McAllister. Don't you dare leave me alone. I finally found someone who sees me, who wants me, and I will not let you go." He woke hours later to find her still holding him, tears frozen on her cheeks. "Maggie," he rasped, and pulled her down into a kiss that tasted like desperation and gratitude and love he could finally name. "I thought I was dead. I thought I'd never see you again. You're not getting rid of me that easily. I don't want to get rid of you at all." He cupped her face with shaking hands. "I love you. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was scared and stupid and still half living in the past. But I love you, Maggie. You're not convenient. You're not a replacement. You're everything I didn't know I needed. And I'm sorry it took almost dying for me to say it." She kissed him then, hard and fierce, and they made love with an urgency born of almost loss, of time running out, of two people finally admitting what they'd been dancing around for months. "Stay inside me fully," she whispered against his throat afterward, her massive frame trembling beneath him. Not just physically, but emotionally. Give me all of you, not just pieces. Not just what's left after grief takes its share. Only you, he growled, pressing deeper into her warmth. And it wasn't about bodies anymore, but about souls finally meeting. Walls finally crumbling. Two broken people choosing each other completely. The next morning, they faced their reality. The bank note was due in 2 weeks. They had $300 saved. They needed $800. Josiah sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. I'm going to lose this place. I'm going to lose everything Clara and I built. No, Maggie's voice was steel. You're not losing anything. We're selling the cattle early. Taking a loss, but getting cash now. I'm selling my mother's silver. We're asking the bank for an extension. And if Edmund Vast wants a fight, we'll give him one. Maggie, I'm not letting you give up, Si. You didn't give up on me when every rational thought said you should have. I'm not giving up on us now. They fought. God, how they fought. Sold everything that wasn't nailed down. Maggie took work in town. Blacksmithing, hauling freight, jobs that paid cash and made people stare because no woman should be that strong. The gossip got worse. Pearl DeVoe started rumors that Maggie was cursed, that she'd brought bad luck to Josiah's ranch. Vast spread whispers that she was barren, that any day now Josiah would come to his senses. But something unexpected happened. Ruth Crane, the sheriff's wife, stood up in church one Sunday and told everyone who'd listen about Maggie killing the grizzly that would have killed Josiah, about her working herself to exhaustion to save their ranch, about what real strength looked like, and it wasn't fitting into a corset. Other women started talking, started defending her, started seeing past her size to who she actually was. March 1st came. They walked into the bank with $760, every cent they had in the world. The banker looked at them with something like pity. You're $40 short, McAllister. I'm sorry, but I've got $40. Sheriff Crane walked in, holding out cash. Call it a loan. Maggie fixed my wagon axle last week, wouldn't take payment. Figure I owe her. I've got 20 more, Ruth added, appearing behind her husband. For the woman who taught half the town that being different isn't the same as being wrong. One by one, townspeople filed in. Small amounts, $5, $10, $20. People who'd gossiped about Maggie now standing with her because they'd watched her fight, watched her love, watched her refuse to be anything other than exactly who she was. When the last dollar was counted, they had $835. The banker stamped their note paid in full. Broken Creek was saved. Outside the bank, Maggie stood in the March sunshine and cried. Josiah wrapped his arms around her, around his giant, magnificent wife, who'd saved his life, his ranch, his heart, and held on tight. I told you we'd figure it out, he said. We did it together, she corrected. That's what matters. That night in their bed in the house that was finally, truly theirs, Maggie whispered against his skin, Stay inside me fully. No more ghosts. No more half measures. Just us. Only you, Josiah promised, and meant it with everything he was. Only ever you. They'd started as strangers. A transaction. A desperate arrangement between two people who'd run out of options. But they'd become something neither expected. Partners, lovers, home. The lonely rancher had found his reason to live. The giant mail-order bride had found someone who loved her not despite her strength, but because of it. And together, they'd built something worth fighting for. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And that was enough. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that will touch your heart. Because love isn't about fitting into someone else's expectations. It's about finding someone who sees you fully and chooses you anyway. It's about staying, even when leaving would be easier. It's about two imperfect people building something beautiful from broken pieces. That's what Maggie and Josiah learned. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we all need to remember. I'm filthy, don't take off my clothes, the giant mail-order bride said. The cowboy pulled back the blanket and froze in shock. Declan Warrenson had fallen in love with his mail-order bride through 37 letters, and today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. The cowboy had waited on that train platform in Shepherd's Bend, Montana, his heart pounding, ready to finally meet the woman who'd written, "I'm yours, if you'll have me," at the end of every letter. When Marlo Thatcher stepped off that train, nearly 6 feet tall with copper hair and green eyes, Declan thought she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. But something was wrong. His giant bride could barely stand, wrapped in layers of filthy clothes, and when she looked at him, those green eyes held nothing but terror. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you the truth." An hour into their ride home, Marlo collapsed. The cowboy pulled his horse to a stop under the cottonwood tree, his hands shaking as he lifted his mail-order bride down and laid her gently on the blanket in the dirt. "Don't take off my clothes," she begged, blood soaking through her skirts. "Please, Declan. In your letters you said you could love me. But you don't know what I'm hiding. You don't know how filthy I am." The cowboy knelt beside her in the dirt, his horse waiting behind him, and looked at the woman he'd been falling in love with through letters for 6 weeks. "Marlo, I need to help you," Declan said softly, his calloused hands moving to the blanket covering her trembling body. "No!" His bride grabbed his wrists desperately. "When you see what's under these clothes, when you see what I really am, you'll never love me the way you promised in your letters." But the cowboy's hands were already moving, already pulling back the blanket covering his giant, mail-order bride's shaking form. "Let me see," Declan whispered. "Let me see what you think makes you unlovable." His fingers peeled away the fabric as his bride sobbed beneath the tree. And when the cowboy finally saw what Marlo had been hiding under all those clothes, the cowboy pulled back the blanket and froze in shock. She was pregnant, heavily pregnant, 8 months at least, maybe more. Her belly was swollen beneath layers of fabric she'd wrapped so tight around herself that the cloth had cut deep red lines into her skin. Some of those cuts were bleeding. The bindings looked like torture devices, like she'd been trying to make herself disappear, to crush the evidence of what she carried until it simply stopped existing. Declan's hands went numb, his vision blurred at the edges. Behind him, his horse nickered softly, the only sound in the sudden terrible silence under that tree. "Now you know," Marlo whispered. Her voice was hollow, dead. "Now you know why I'm filthy." The cowboy couldn't speak, couldn't move. His mind was racing through every letter she'd written, searching for clues he'd missed, signs he should have seen. She'd never mentioned this, not once, not even a hint. "I should have told you," his bride continued, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face as she lay there in front of him. "I should have written it in my first letter. Dear Mr. Warrenson, I'm pregnant with another man's baby and I need to disappear before he kills me. But I didn't, because I knew you'd never send for me if you knew the truth." Declan's throat felt like it was closing. "Who?" His voice cracked. "Who did this to you? Does it matter?" Marlo's laugh was bitter and broken. "He's coming for me anyway. He's probably already on a train heading west. And when he gets here, when he finds out I ran..." She closed her eyes. "We're both dead, Declan, you and me. That's what you bought for your $50. A corpse, and the man who's coming to make sure I become one." The cowboy's hands were still frozen on the edge of the blanket, his body locked in that kneeling position as his entire world rearranged itself. This wasn't supposed to happen. Mail-order brides were supposed to be simple, safe, a transaction that led to companionship. Maybe even love eventually, but without the complications of courtship. Without the risk of this. "Say something," Marlo begged, her green eyes searching his face desperately. "Yell at me, hit me. Tell me you're putting me back on the train tomorrow. Just say something, please. This silence is killing me." But Declan couldn't say anything, because 3 years ago, his wife Sarah had died in childbirth along with their daughter. He'd held them both as they slipped away, had buried them on the hill behind his ranch, had sworn he'd never let himself care about anyone that deeply again, because the pain of losing them had nearly destroyed him. And now here was Marlo, pregnant and terrified and bleeding in his arms, asking him to choose, asking him to decide if she was worth the danger, worth the risk, worth the inevitable heartbreak that seemed to follow him like a shadow. The cowboy looked down at his mail-order bride, lying in the dirt beneath the cottonwood tree, her belly swollen with another man's child, her eyes begging him for mercy or rejection. Anything but this terrible silence, and Declan Warrenson made a choice that would change both their lives forever. "Get up!" Marlowe's eyes went wide with shock. Those were the first words the cowboy had spoken in what felt like an eternity, and they weren't what she'd expected. Not anger, not disgust. Just two simple words delivered in a voice that left no room for argument. I can't," she stammered. "I'm bleeding. I think something's wrong with the baby. I said get up." Declan's hands were already moving, already sliding under her shoulders and lifting her into a sitting position with surprising gentleness, despite the command in his voice. "We're an hour from my ranch and you're losing blood. I need to stop the bleeding here or you won't make it home. Home." He'd said home, not back to the train station, not away from here. Home. Marlowe's breath caught in her throat as the cowboy pulled a knife from his boot. For one terrifying second, she thought he was going to kill her right there under that tree, put her out of her misery like a wounded animal. But instead, Declan began cutting away the layers of fabric she'd wrapped. Around her belly, the cruel bindings that had kept her secret hidden for 17 days on that train from Philadelphia. "This is going to hurt," he said quietly, his weathered hands working with practiced efficiency. "These cuts are deep. The fabric stuck to some of them." "I don't care about pain," Marlowe whispered. "I deserve it." The cowboy's hands stopped moving. He looked up at her, and for the first time since pulling back that blanket, his eyes met hers fully. "Don't!" Declan said, his voice hard as iron. "Don't you dare tell me you deserve pain." "Nobody deserves this." He went back to cutting away the bindings, and Marlowe bit down on her lip to keep from screaming as the fabric pulled away from wounds that had been festering for weeks. The Montana sun beat down on them. His horse shifted its weight nearby, and the cowboy worked in silence, his jaw clenched tight, his hands steady despite the horror he was uncovering. "I was an army medic," Declan said suddenly, his voice carefully neutral as he peeled away another layer. "Served during the Indian Wars, saw things that would make most men lose their minds. Patched up soldiers with their guts hanging out, amputated limbs in tents while men screamed, held boys younger than you while they died calling for their mothers." Marlowe didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just watched his face as he worked, watched the way his jaw tightened every time he uncovered another wound. "I tell you that," the cowboy continued, pulling the last of the bindings free, "because I want you to understand something. I've seen the worst things men can do to each other. I've seen violence and cruelty and suffering that would break your heart. And you know what I learned from all that?" He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen and a clean cloth, began wetting the fabric to clean her wounds. His hands were so gentle it made Marlowe want to cry. "I learned," Declan said softly, his eyes focused on her injuries, "that the only thing that matters in this world is whether you choose to cause more suffering or whether you choose to stop it. That's it. That's the only choice that defines who you are. So what are you choosing?" Marlowe's voice came out as barely a whisper. "With me?" The cowboy's hands stilled on her belly, his palm resting gently against the curve where her baby moved beneath the skin. "I'm choosing to stop your suffering," Declan said, looking up at her with eyes that held no judgment, no anger, only a fierce determination that took her breath away. "I'm choosing to keep you safe, and I'm choosing to raise this baby with you if you'll have me." Marlowe stared at him in disbelief. "You don't mean that. You can't mean that. You don't even know what happened to me. You don't know—" "Then tell me," the cowboy interrupted. "Tell me everything while I clean these wounds. Tell me who's coming after you and why. Tell me what I need to know to protect you. Because make no mistake, Marlowe," his eyes blazed with something that looked dangerously close to love, "you're my wife now, and I don't let anyone hurt what's mine." So lying there in the dirt beneath the cottonwood tree, with the cowboy's gentle hands tending her wounds, Marlowe Thatcher began to tell him about Silas Murdoch, about her father's gambling debts, about the night Murdoch came to collect and decided her father's daughter would do just fine as payment, about the assault, about the threat that if she ever told anyone, he'd kill her and everyone she loved. about discovering she was pregnant and knowing that Murdoch would use the baby to trap her forever, a living chain she could never escape. And as she spoke, the cowboy cleaned her wounds, wrapped her belly in clean cloth from his saddlebag, and listened without interruption. His face grew harder with every word, his jaw clenched tighter. His hands moved more gently, as if he could somehow erase her trauma through the tenderness of his touch. When Marlowe finished, when she'd told him everything and was trembling with exhaustion and fear and the vulnerability of being truly seen for the first time in 8 months, Declan Warrenson lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing at all. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I think so." "Good." He carried her to his horse, settled her in the saddle with infinite care, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her body, protective, strong, solid, and Marlowe felt something she hadn't felt in 8 months. Safe. "What are we going to do?" she asked, as the horse began moving toward his ranch. "When Murdoch comes, and he will come, Declan. He has money and men, and let him come," the cowboy said quietly against her ear. "Let him try to take you. Because I've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" Declan's arms tightened around her, one hand resting gently on her belly where her baby moved beneath his palm. "I've got a reason to fight that's stronger than his reason to hunt. He wants to own you. I want to love you. And love Marlowe." His voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "Love is always stronger than hate." Behind them, the cottonwood tree disappeared from view. Ahead of them, the Montana landscape stretched out endless and beautiful. And between them, something fragile and precious began to grow. Something that felt dangerously like hope. But 20 miles away, in the town of Shepherd's Bend, a man in an expensive suit was stepping off a train and asking the station master one simple question. "Did a tall woman with copper hair arrive here recently? Pregnant? Traveling alone?" And when the station master nodded yes, the man smiled, a cold, terrible smile that promised violence, and reached into his coat for the wanted poster he'd had printed in Philadelphia. A poster that claimed Marlowe Thatcher was a thief who'd stolen $5,000 and fled with her employer's unborn child. A poster that would turn every lawman in Montana Territory into Silas Murdoch's hunting dog. The ranch appeared on the horizon, just as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting everything gold and orange and crimson like the world was on fire. Marlowe had drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, her body pressed against Declan's chest, his steady heartbeat against her back, the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Now, as the horse slowed to a walk approaching the wooden fence line, she forced her eyes open and saw the place that was supposed to become her home. It was smaller than she'd imagined, a modest ranch house with a covered porch, a barn that had seen better days, corrals that needed mending. But it was clean, cared for, the kind of place a man built with his own 2 hands and tended with quiet pride. The kind of place that could be filled with laughter and love if given the chance. "It's not much," Declan said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "But it's mine. Free and clear. And now it's yours too." Before Marlowe could respond, the front door of the ranch house flew open, and a woman emerged, round and solid and somewhere in her 50s, with dark hair streaked with grey and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Marlowe, slumped in the saddle, and her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm to fierce determination in the span of a heartbeat. "Dios mio," the woman breathed, already moving toward them. "Senor Deck, what happened? Is this your bride?" "Rosa, I need your help." The cowboy was already dismounting, already reaching up to lift Marlowe down with hands that trembled slightly despite their strength. "She's injured, pregnant, been hiding it for weeks, and the bindings cut into her skin. I cleaned the wounds, but—" "Say no more." Rosa was already at his side, her weathered hands reaching for Marlowe with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen her share of suffering. "Bring her inside. Quickly now. We don't have time to waste." The next hour passed in a blur of pain and kindness. Rosa, who turned out to be Declan's housekeeper and the closest thing to family he had left, moved through the ranch house like a general commanding an army. She had Marlowe stripped of her filthy traveling clothes, sponged clean with warm water that smelled like lavender, and dressed in a soft cotton nightgown that must have belonged to someone else. Someone who wasn't here anymore. This was Sarah's, Rosa said quietly, as if sensing Marlowe's unspoken question. Senor Deck's first wife. She died 3 years ago, in childbirth. The older woman's hands were gentle as they worked. He's never let another woman wear her things before. Never even went back into this room after we buried her. So you understand what it means, yes? That he brought you here? That he's giving you her clothes? Marlowe's throat closed. She couldn't speak, could only nod as tears slipped down her cheeks. Good, Rosa said, satisfaction in her voice. Then you understand that my Declan doesn't do anything halfway. When he chooses to love, he loves with his whole heart. And he's chosen you, Mija, even with all your complications. Her eyes dropped meaningfully to Marlowe's swollen belly. Especially with your complications. I don't understand why, Marlowe whispered. I lied to him. I brought danger to his doorstep. I'm carrying another man's... but that's where you're wrong. Rosa's fingers worked carefully on the bandages, rewrapping the wounds with clean cloth. You're not carrying another man's child. Not anymore. You're carrying Declan Warrenson's son or daughter now. Because that's how he'll see it from this day forward. That baby will have his name, his protection, his love. And anyone who says different will have to answer to him. The older woman's eyes grew fierce. I've known that boy since he was 20 years old and came to Montana Territory with nothing but a horse and a dream. Watched him build this ranch with his bare hands. Watched him fall in love with Sarah and lose her and nearly lose himself in the grief. And I'm telling you right now, Rosa leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper. He's a good man, the best man, but he's also dangerous when someone threatens what he loves. And he loves you already, whether you believe it or not. Before Marlowe could respond, Declan appeared in the doorway. He'd cleaned up, changed his shirt, but his eyes still held that same fierce protectiveness she'd seen under the cottonwood tree. How is she? She'll live, Rosa said briskly, gathering up the soiled bandages. But she needs rest. Real rest, not whatever she's been getting on that train. And food. When's the last time you ate, Mia? Marlowe tried to remember and couldn't. I don't know. Days, maybe? Days. Rosa's voice dripped with disapproval. Dios mío. No wonder you collapsed. She turned to Declan. I'm making soup. You stay with her. Don't let her fall asleep until she's eaten something. And you... She pointed at Marlowe with a wooden spoon that had appeared from somewhere. You eat every bite I bring you or you answer to me. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Marlowe whispered, and despite everything, despite the terror and the pain and the uncertainty, she felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. Rosa swept out of the room like a storm cloud, leaving Declan and Marlowe alone for the first time since arriving at the ranch. The cowboy stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking at her lying in his dead wife's bed, wearing his dead wife's nightgown, and Marlowe couldn't read the expression on his face. I'm sorry, she said finally, unable to bear the silence. About your wife, about the baby, Rosa told me. I can sleep somewhere else if this is too... No. Declan moved into the room, pulled a chair close to the bed, and sat down like he planned to stay there all night. This is exactly where you should be. Sarah would have wanted it this way. She always said this room should be filled with life and hope, not grief and memories. He reached out slowly, giving Marlowe time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and rough and warm, and Marlowe realized with a start that she'd never actually touched him before. Not really, not like this, with intention and gentleness, and the weight of everything they'd been through pressing down on both of them. I need you to understand something, the cowboy said quietly. When I pulled back that blanket today and saw you were pregnant, my first thought wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. You want to know what it was? Marlowe nodded, not trusting her voice. Relief, Declan said, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Because I thought for a second that you were dying. That I'd brought you all this way, just to lose you, the same way I lost Sarah. And when I realized you were pregnant, when I understood that's what you'd been hiding," his voice cracked, "I was relieved, because pregnant means alive. Pregnant means there's a future. Pregnant means I get a second chance at the family I thought I'd never have again. But it's not your baby," Marlowe whispered. It's ours." The cowboy's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "From this moment forward, this baby is ours. Mine and yours. And when Murdoch comes, because you're right, he will come. He's going to learn that trying to take my family from me is the last mistake he'll ever make." Marlowe stared at him. This man she'd known for less than a day. This man who'd fallen in love with her through letters and chosen to keep loving her, even after seeing her darkest truth. "Why?" she breathed. "Why would you do this? Why would you risk everything for someone like me?" Declan leaned forward, his free hand reaching up to cup her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "Because I've been dead inside for 3 years, Marlowe. Walking and breathing and going through the motions, but not really living. Not really feeling anything except this emptiness that went so deep, I thought it might swallow me whole. And then your first letter arrived." His voice grew thick with emotion. "And for the first time since Sarah died, I felt something. Hope, curiosity, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could learn to live again." He brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "So you're not just someone I'm saving. You're someone who's saving me right back. And I'll be damned if I let some monster from Philadelphia destroy that." Before Marlowe could respond, before she could tell him that she was falling in love. With him too, that she'd been falling since that first letter, where he'd written, "Tell me what makes you laugh." The sound of horses approaching shattered the moment. Multiple horses. Moving fast, Declan was on his feet instantly, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. "Rosa!" he called out. "Get in here now!" The older woman appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Senor Deck, there are men outside. 5 of them, and they're carrying papers. Official-looking papers with a seal." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "It's too soon. Murdoch couldn't have gotten here this fast unless—" He turned to Marlowe, and she saw the realization dawn in his eyes. "Unless he sent someone ahead. Someone who was already in Montana territory waiting for word that you'd arrived." A knock sounded on the front door. Hard, authoritative. The kind of knock that demanded an answer. "Declan Warrenson," a voice called from outside. "This is Deputy Marshal Frank Garrett. I need to speak with you about a fugitive who may have arrived on today's train. A woman wanted for theft in Philadelphia. Open this door, or I'll be forced to break it down." Marlowe's blood turned to ice. "They found me," she whispered. "Oh God, Declan, they found me already." The cowboy looked at her, looked at the door, looked back at her. And then he did something Marlowe didn't expect. He smiled, not a happy smile, a dangerous one. The smile of a man who'd spent 3 years with nothing left to lose and had suddenly found something worth fighting for. "Good," Declan said quietly. "Let them come. Let's get this over with right now." Declan walked to the front door, with his hand resting on his gun, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. When he opened the door, 5 men stood on his porch, a deputy marshal with hard eyes and 4 hired guns who looked like they'd killed for the price of a meal. The deputy held up a piece of paper with an official seal. "Mr. Warrenson, I have a warrant here for the arrest of Marlowe Thatcher. She's wanted in Philadelphia for theft of $5,000 and kidnapping an unborn child belonging to Mr. Silas Murdoch. I'm told she arrived on today's train and may have come to this ranch." The deputy's eyes were cold. "Is she here?" "She's here," Declan said calmly. "She's also my wife. Married by proxy 3 weeks ago. Legal and binding under Montana territory law." The deputy's expression didn't change. "That doesn't change the charges, Mr. Warrenson. I need to take her into custody." "No." The cowboy's voice was quiet but absolute. "You don't." "Sir, I don't want trouble. Then you shouldn't have brought guns to my property." Declan stepped onto the porch, and something in his posture made the 4 hired men shift nervously. "That warrant is based on false testimony from a man who raped my wife and is trying to use the law to drag her back to Philadelphia so he can finish what he started. She didn't steal anything. She ran for her life. And I'll be damned if I let you or anyone else take her. Behind the deputy, a horse moved in the shadows. A man in an expensive suit stepped forward into the light, and Marlowe's terrified voice came from inside the house. "That's him! That's Murdoch!" Silas Murdoch smiled, cold and cruel. "Hello, Marlowe. Did you really think you could run from me? That I wouldn't find you?" He turned to the deputy. "As you can see, Marshal, the woman is clearly here. I want her arrested immediately, and I want my child returned to Philadelphia where it belongs. Your child." Declan's voice dropped to something dangerous. "That baby belongs to my wife, and my wife belongs with me. Now get off my property before I make you leave." Murdoch's smile widened. "Or what? You'll shoot a deputy marshal? You'll start a war you can't possibly win." He gestured to the hired guns. "I have the law on my side, cowboy." "What do you have?" "He has me." Everyone turned as Rosa stepped onto the porch holding a shotgun, like she knew exactly how to use it. Behind her, 3 more figures emerged from the barn, ranch hands Declan had sent for earlier, all armed, all loyal. "And me," said a new voice. Sheriff Tom Bridger rode up on horseback, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "I got a very interesting telegram from a federal marshal in Philadelphia about an hour ago. Seems there's no Judge Harrison who signed that warrant. Seems the signature's a forgery. And seems Mr. Murdoch here is under investigation for human trafficking and extortion." The sheriff's eyes were hard. "So that warrant's worthless, Deputy Garrett. And if you try to take Mrs. Warrenson anywhere, you'll be arrested for kidnapping." The deputy's face went pale. He looked at Murdoch, looked at the warrant, looked at Declan and his armed supporters. I didn't know." "Now you do," Sheriff Bridger said. "So, I suggest you and your men ride out of here before I decide to investigate who paid you to ignore proper legal procedure." The deputy and his hired guns were gone within minutes. But Murdoch remained, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed at Declan. "That child is mine by blood. I'll come back with real lawyers, real warrants, then I'll be waiting," the cowboy said quietly. "And every time you come, I'll be ready. Every time you try to take her, I'll stop you. Because she's mine now, Murdoch. And I protect what's mine." Silas Murdoch stared at him for a long moment, then turned and rode away into the darkness. Inside the house, Declan found Marlowe standing by the window, tears streaming down her face. "It's not over," she whispered. "He'll keep coming. He'll never stop." "Then neither will I," the cowboy said, pulling her into his arms. "I'll fight him every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes." 6 months later, Marlowe Warrenson gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Sadie Rose. Declan held his daughter and looked at his wife, no longer terrified, no longer broken but strong and loved and finally free, and knew he'd made the right choice that day under the cottonwood tree. Some loves are worth fighting for. Some families are chosen, not born. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pull back the blanket and choose to love what you find beneath. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments what moment moved you most. And if you believe in second chances and love that conquers fear, hit that subscribe button, because we have more stories that will restore your faith in the power of choosing love over fear. Watch our next story about a woman who discovers her husband's secret has been protecting her all along. You won't want to miss it.